and welcome to 3Q, where I interview industry professionals for just 15 minutes by asking three powerful questions. I'm your host, Rachel Vogel, and joining me for tonight's episode is Jeff Vaughn, founder and CEO of Signal Records, a joint venture with Columbia at Sony Music. Prior to the launch of Signal, he was the chairman and chief executive officer at Capitol Music Group, and while at Capitol, he led the creative direction and operations at the company's flagship label, Capitol Records, while also managing CMG's broad portfolio of labels, including Astralwerks, Blue Note, Capitol Christian Music Group, and its music distribution arm, Virgin Music, Artists, and Label Services. Jeff is best known for personally signing and/or directly A&Ring contemporary hip-hop and R&B stars like NBA Youngboy, NLE Choppa, Don Toliver, Kevin Gates, Kehlani, Young Thug, and many, many others. He's also overseen releases from artists across a wide variety of genres, including Halsey, Paul McCartney, Katy Perry, Niall Horan, and many more. Last but not least, it's important to note that he began his career in the mailroom at United Talent Agency. So without further ado, Jeff, it's an honor to have you on the podcast. Before we get started, what is the latest in your world?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's, I was unfamiliar with the podcast when you and I got connected, but I had a chance to go through and listen to some of the episodes, and it's really a fantastic platform for industry professionals and also for people looking to get into it. So congratulations on what you've built, and I'm thrilled to be a part of it.
Thank you.
In terms of what's the latest for me is I'm in build mode at the moment. I had a wonderful experience leading Capitol through the pandemic, and when I left at the end of 2021, I had to really think about what was next. And obviously there were a number of opportunities on the table, but the thing that I kept coming back to was just the opportunity to build something from scratch, to build something that was my own, to build something that I thought was needed for the modern business. And so with a small group of people, right, I'm in the process of doing that, and so grateful for my partnership with Columbia. But we're just in sign and development mode, which is really my passion, and so really excited about that.
Awesome. Well, we're excited to see where Signal takes you. Are you ready for question one?
Sure.
Imagine for a second you're sitting down with your 25-year-old self. What one piece of advice would you give him on a personal note, and what's one piece of advice you would give him from a business perspective?
I think this is a great question. I was thinking a lot about it. I think on the personal side, and this might be just a function of getting older, which you can't appreciate at 25, but the connection between your physical condition and your just mental state, mental performance, day-to-day performance is so real. And that was not something that I appreciated at 25 in terms of sleep and diet and exercise. I think, at 25, it was burning the candle at both ends. And I find, myself super productive Monday through Wednesday. And then by Thursday and Friday, it would start to tail off. Those late nights would sort of take a toll, and then you wouldn't be super productive. And then you'd have to kind of recharge and try and do it again. And you get sick more often. And so as I've gotten older and I started to really, discover those links, exercise is just key to my routine now. I think everyone struggles a little bit with the diet part, but getting better. But I just see the results, and I'm much more in tune, much more positive, much more optimistic, just because I've been able to kind of get those two things under control. So definitely good advice for anyone that's coming up. On the professional side, I think the thing I really appreciate today that I may not have appreciated at 25 is just how important long-term relationships are in the business to getting things done. I think the value of that has gone up actually over time in my experience. I think a lot of times early in my career, a lot of the A&R work that I was doing was sort of in studio, edits and suggestions and songwriting collaborations and things like that. But, as I'm developing artists in sort of this post-pandemic era, really being able to make phone calls and to form partnerships and make introductions has become sort of the most important part of my job. And so, at 25, starting to really network across with your peers, starting to develop a reputation as someone that gets things done, as someone that can deliver a feature verse, as someone that can move your artists. And then when you find other people like that at other companies, really nurturing those relationships over the long run, and you guys all come up together. And so I would just, at 25, I would have said, just make sure you're nurturing those and making sure that you're taking the long view of any relationship, and know that there's going to be bumps and bruises along the way, but that they're going to come in handy later. So really treasure them.
All great advice. So I'm curious, somebody with your track record, you ran a major corporation label, and now you're running another one. I'm curious to know, was there a defining moment where you realized that that is what your goal was, or did it just kind of, that's how what ended up happening?
It's a really good question. I think I'm one of those rare people that had a clear sense of what they wanted to do very quickly in my career. I've always had a passion for music. I've always been sort of a credit nerd. I've always been the kind of person that could identify a producer just by the sound of the track. Kind of before producer tags were a thing, in the early 2000s. And so I was always really passionate about getting into music, and I was always really passionate about A&R. And I just had to kind of find a way to get there.
Mm-hmm.
And so in terms of the defining moment, I would just say the defining moment was making the decision to leave United Talent Agency, where I'd spent 2.5, 3 years, getting to the point where I was about to be promoted as an agent, making basically a horizontal move. So I didn't get promoted. I basically took the same job to go over to work for Mike Caren at Atlantic Records as his assistant. And that was the defining move because it opened up, the label side of the business to me at a time when it wasn't easy to get those jobs.
100%. Okay, moving along. Question two. Every industry has its dirty little secrets, and you and I both know that it is no different in the music industry. But sometimes people think that's a good thing. What's one secret you would like to share with our listeners about the industry?
One of the great little secrets about the business is just in general, I think, how open people are to collaboration as creatives or as entrepreneurs in the business. I've always found that some of the most important people to know are also the most responsive and the most open to a cold call or an introduction or an opportunity. And so, I think there's always an intimidation factor when you're trying to make your way into the industry or break into it. But a smart cold email, I've hired people based off of that, just people that have impressed me in their initial communication, and I kind of trained them a little bit and tested them, but I've
Mhm.
actually hired people that way. So I would just encourage anyone that has an idea to share it, and I think good things happen when you do that.
So, going off of that, is there any specific quality characteristic that you look for when hiring somebody aside from that?
Yeah, I would say the two things are consistency and follow through. That's actually three things. I think consistency and follow through, and then also just openness to coaching. I would say
Hmm.
those are the things that I really look for. Obviously, there's a little bit of taste that's required on the A&R side of things, and you want to have spent the years nurturing and developing that because it's your passion of just listening to everything in a specific genre. But I think in general, as long as you have a baseline for taste and for cultural awareness, it's those other factors that are going to determine how far you go and the opportunities that are presented to you.
Final question. Throughout your career, I can only imagine you've been asked plenty of questions, whether for an industry conference, the media, or even a promotion. But throughout all of those interviews and all of those questions, there has to be one question you've never been asked but would have liked to. So, what is that question and what would be your answer?
Yeah, so I had to. This was the hardest question for me because I really haven't done much press at all. Very few interviews, very few press. So I haven't been asked many questions enough to know like what's the one. But I would say the third one when you said when people ask for a promotion, I definitely have plenty of experience with that. And I guess what I would say is I'm always surprised that people don't proactively lay out their vision of what their plan is for their career. I
Hmm.
can't think of a single report or a single hire who has sort of approached me proactively without being prompted and just said, "Hey, here's where I'm at. Here's what I'm doing. Here's where I want to be in a year, and here's where I want to be in 5 years." And then certainly I've never had anyone sort of follow through on that on a yearly basis and update it and say, "This is where I succeeded. This is where I failed." And so there's a lot of conversation, I think, post pandemic with employee retention and how companies can show employees, what's the path for them, and it's just very one sided. And I think people usually end up dissatisfied with whatever the path is that the company puts in front of them. A lot of times because the companies don't have the full information. So, my advice is anyone that has a clear sense of what they want to do, they should be vulnerable and put that out there and set big goals and set big ambitions and let your managers know what your intentions are. And so I'm always surprised that doesn't happen, but I wish it happened more.
I think you bring up such a great point that it's so important to stay not only vulnerable and let people know what you want to do, but just like you said before, be consistent, because that'll get you what you want.
A plan without action is just a plan. You have to take the steps. you have to take the steps within it.
Exactly. Well, on that note, Jeff, it has been such a pleasure having you on tonight. Thank you so much for taking the time. To everyone listening, I hope you enjoyed tonight's episode. Stay tuned for next week of 3Q, where I interview industry professionals for just 15 minutes by asking 3 powerful questions. See you next time.